New this morning, tens of thousands of Boeing workers officially on strike as of the early hours this morning. The walkouts at facilities in Washington and other states now follow union votes happening yesterday.
The tally shows supermajorities of members reject a proposed new contract and approve of the strike. Amy Kiley has insight from Boeing workers.
Strike! Strike! Strike!
About 33,000 Boeing workers are on strike today. That's after union workers voted down a proposed contract and authorized the walkout to start overnight.
Our members rejected the contract by 94.6%, and they voted to strike by 96%.
The strike affects workers at facilities in multiple states.
I'm just emotional because my daughter still lives at home, and she makes more than I do. But she went to college, right? So she'll step in for my wife and I, but that's not going to make me sign yes.
The rejected contract lists a 25% raise spread out over 4 years. Boeing says that's its largest ever general wage increase. It says the deal also helps with health care and retirement costs.
Boeing is portraying to the media that it's this greatest thing they've ever done, and it's not.
Critics say it's not enough.
We have members that are still living in their cars at maxed out pay because they cannot afford to live in this state and work at this company.
I made more at Walmart than working here.
Some say they're upset union negotiators settled for less than the 40% they had wanted.
What we asked to be brought to the table wasn't. It was actually, it's like I said, it was kind of a slap in the face.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
Now, the Boeing strike could affect the U.S. economy, but analysts say it's unlikely to impact consumer traffic.